We did hear speakers state that maybe concerns over competitiveness in adopting green policies may be somewhat overstated. But then many, of course, stressed that those policies, those green policies, will have to be credible, predictable, and yet flexible, and also be focused in accelerating green innovation. And of course, the innovation could make firms gain competitive advantages. So there's a certain ecosystem that has to be built. On jobs, the renewable energy sector, for example, can create good quality jobs, but there are sectors such as coal mining that, of course, will see job losses. And to smooth the transition, we have to have social dialogue, we have to have social safety nets, and reskilling is crucial. Mitigating the impacts on households is important, and well, there are some examples of energy and carbon price increases that are causing concern, but measures will be taken as safety nets. An example might be a reduction in taxes on labor. Policymakers need to bring communities and citizens along in the transition, starting with green education and knowledge dissemination. And there is a gap between perception and evidence when it comes to making for a faster transition. And so we must fill this gap, and climate action cannot be a rational economic process in the real world. We have to understand the political realities, and behavioral insights can shed light on how to better design policies and communicate well to the public about measures such as carbon tax. Also, communicating clearly on the intention of policy measures, such as an intention to recycle tax revenues might help. And to address the political economy of green transition, communication is key in all respects. And we do need to develop positive narratives for a greener future, and those, of course, will have to be forward-looking. And organizations like the OECD would need to keep building the evidence base and do sound economic analysis. I think I picked this up, particularly in the previous session. And of course, we need to lead by example and to change our behavior. So I trust the conference has given us a lot of food for thought and many inspirations on what further work is needed, and of course for advancing the inclusive green growth agenda. And in closing, I encourage the GGKP to continue its excellent work as the leading global network of international organizations and experts. With UNIDO joining the GGKP's 4 founding partners, the Global Green Growth Institute, the UN Environment, the World Bank, and the OECD, and many more knowledge partners. This conference has generated momentum for further institutional collaboration.
So now, as I mentioned, we have a steering committee of the 5 intergovernmental organizations, but it really reflects a much, much broader partnership of 60+ organizations, literally thousands of experts around the world working in this space. And so we thought we would take this opportunity just to hear from those founding organizations, the steering committee, the management board, how they see this partnership developing. And as Mr. Kono mentioned, UNIDO has recently joined the management board, the steering committee. We were going to actually have a signing ceremony here, but we found it might be a little bit convoluted with 5 agencies passing 5 papers, 5 MOUs back and forth. So we actually had the signing ceremony a bit before at the coffee break. So I have proof that we do have a signed memorandum of understanding, but we wanted to save you the pain of watching everyone sign documents. But part of the reason we signed the new MOU was really to try to instill this sense that we were going to take this initiative forward, that the institutions that had created it were still committed and recommitted to making it grow, but also importantly to begin to engage much more with the private sector. And that's been critical, and I think that's been a theme throughout the last 2.5 days of how critical it is to engage the private sector. They're absolutely essential to this transition. So we're absolutely delighted that the UN Industrial Development Organization has joined.
From my perspective, the starting point is to look a little bit back. What do we actually collectively want to achieve? So collectively, and I mean even beyond the organizations here represented on the podium, I think what we collectively want to achieve is that we want to have a parallel growth, economic growth, getting more people into the position to actually participate in and then benefit from economic development. As a member of an industrial development organization, not a very surprising viewpoint. And then combine that at the same time with advancing environmental objectives and actually, simply said, cleaning the planet. Now, what are the stakeholders there? The industry is definitely one of the most important stakeholders. Why would I say that? Because industry is the one who is actually, in the end, at the lever to do the final switch. The final switch in a production to make it cleaner, the final switch in the design of a product to make it less pollutant, the final switch in the design and subsequent recycling and repair to make it long-lasting, repairable across the world. All of this requires, in the end, action on the level of one or the other industry.
When we started with GGKP, one of the things that was very much in our thoughts was this idea of how do we communicate, how do we convince, right? And that was one of the things that Elke worked with us at the time. And you know, the reason why we started the Green Growth Knowledge Platform is because all of our institutions were talking about green growth, but there was a little bit of a risk of cognitive dissonance because we all came at it with a slightly different angle and a slightly different definition, even though substantively it was the same. So the idea was to turn what could have become a bit of a cacophony into a real symphony and to be more convincing in our message that way. And I think we've been very successful in doing that. But to be honest, I don't think green growth has caught on as much as we had hoped it would. And so just thinking back to the lens of the last session, you know, where is it that it hasn't quite worked, and where is it that GGKP can help take it to the next stage? So, you know, thinking back to the sort of the requirements of a successful means to changing perception and action. Number one was the positive, and I think that's where we were spot on. You know, green growth is a positive message. Nobody wants to be brown, stagnant, or something else, right? So it's hard to deny that green growth is a positive message. It's also an apolitical one, and more important, just as Simon pointed out that gay marriage reached across the aisle with the word marriage, growth was specifically chosen to reach into the world of the hardcore macroeconomists who were focused on growth. So that was exactly, their check mark, good for us. Thank you, Simon, for congratulating us on our foresight. And we ignored the deniers. There was nothing in there, about climate change and the science, and I thought we kept it reasonably simple. But there's a question: is it a message that's simple enough? Is green growth really such a simple concept to everybody? And that's a good question for the GGKP in its role as a disseminator and as a platform to carry debates and exchanges, right? Have we made this concept simple enough and so obvious? Both Elke and Simon talked about the importance of focusing on the me and now. What's in it for me now, not tomorrow, not for my grandchildren? And there again, the question, is green growth something that's sufficiently immediate and speaks sufficiently to the individual in the me and now? So let's maybe rethink about how we're communicating green growth and the aspects, for example, now bringing in UNIDO, the aspects of jobs, the aspects of social integration that were discussed in the last couple of days.
One of the things that UN Environment understood is that the message of environment and future generations and the problems to the planet were not reaching out. And so in 2015, we started working on the nexus between environment and health, because the health of people, health of children makes a big difference to the way we speak of the concerns with the environment. And so the environment and health became one of our nexus agendas, and it also started, what shall I say, influencing the green growth discussions and the transitions that we were talking about, because this also spoke to human capital, spoke to productivity, spoke to jobs, and therefore there's a very clear link between not just health of people in terms of the intrinsic value of health, but also the value of health to jobs and human capital. Now, in this connection, why is it that we have so many initiatives? And it speaks again to some of the comments made in the last panel discussion, which is that we have to engage with a variety of different stakeholders. We have to get them on board. We can't just talk to the experts. We can't just talk to the politicians, but we have to talk to the civil society, to communities, to those who are disengaged, or those, as I think Anthony put it, in the various geographies of discontent, great new term. So when we start looking at all of that, that's how you need to engage the various different stakeholder groups. And many of our initiatives speak to those stakeholder groups, because then you can design initiatives which take on board many of their perceptions, many of their understanding, very clearly speak to the spaces between policies and choices. What would make a policy work to influence consumer choice? And that, again, came up very, very nicely in the last panel. So these are the things that we are connected with, whether it is a life cycle initiative, which brings the information about hotspots, or it is One Planet Network, or the Partnership for Green Economy. And all of these come together very nicely in the Green Growth Knowledge Platform. And I informally and formally now use the word glue to refer to the Green Growth Knowledge Platform, because in a way, it is the connector between these various different initiatives that we have, because it draws on the information and the understanding from these other initiatives, and it feeds back into these initiatives. And it is this ability to be able to enhance collaboration as a result of this information sharing and as a result of some of the coordination that GGKP does, that we see that its role can be enhanced. So some more work for you going forward. But the fact is that if we look at this as a glue, if we look at this as also, as Marion says, engaging with other communities that may not be directly involved in the GGKP, we can put out this message much more clearly.
And so we have this new vehicle. I think we can start to see all of these priorities, like addressing the SDGs, like achieving the Paris climate commitments, reaching that 1.5 degree goal, and the urgency is accelerating, of course. All of these come under this heading of green growth. And this is where I come to answer your question, where the GGKP is a convening power. GGI is still relatively small. We are growing. There are more countries who continue to approach us and are very interested in joining our efforts. But we can't do this alone, obviously. And having the GGKP bring us together, it's been an incredibly fantastic vehicle for doing that over the past number of years. And I commend those who had the foresight to launch the GGKP early on. Because it truly has been growing, I think, and responding to a need in a very effective way. We need to think carefully about how we go forward with this, and to be very strategic. I think the challenge is on us to really increase the scale of our efforts, and to think carefully about how we go about that. But we do need to do that in a collaborative way. So all of us here, the 60+ partners all together, I think, using the GGKP as a vehicle for bringing us together in more effective, more strategic ways is something that we have to continue to do. Maybe we can continue to do this a little bit better. The Secretariat, the platform itself, I think, is become more focused over the past couple of years, which is really good, and really launching some new initiatives that are going to be quite important. We are scaling up with the addition of the Green Industry Platform, which is very exciting. And the Green Finance Platform. And I think we will be challenged to make sure that our policy efforts under the existing GGKP platform continue to be as focused and driven as they are, and to now reach these additional communities.
So that's interesting to know. In terms of knowledge frontier and what we have learned from these, the last 3 days. Of course, we have taken a lot of notes, and as mentioned by others already, we don't do this just to have a good exchange. That's just one objective, to bring different policy communities together. But of course, we want to identify what we should be working on next. So let's be forward-looking. And you know, I don't want to repeat ourselves again, but clearly the interface between green growth policies and all the social aspects, the interface with labor market policy, education, skills, the distribution aspects, that's really going to be the focus, at least for the OECD. That's for sure. The organization has been, since the launch of the Green Growth Declaration at the OECD, and it's remarkable because, I say it's remarkable because this was a call by economy and finance ministers of the OECD that came to the, what we call the Ministerial Council meeting back in 2012. And then, so since then, the focus internally in the context of OECD has been the interface between the productivity agenda and the green agenda. And that's, now it's really, really clear. More recently, there's been a lot of focus on inclusive growth at the OECD. So this is going to be the next frontier for us to look at the interface between green growth and inclusive growth. And in a way, we are catching up with our partners because as Marianne and others said, even Stephen said yesterday, from the beginning, for other organizations, when we came together, it was always inclusive green growth. So we are catching up in a way in that context for different reasons. There was always an emphasis with a link with the economics pillar of the sustainable development and weaker analysis, or we haven't had enough. We haven't had enough with the link with the social pillar of the sustainable development. And then another big take home, I think, is again, as everybody said, is the communication. And this positive framing. I think OECD has done a lot of analysis with modeling and empirical analysis to look at the cost of inaction. And I would like to recap what Professor Stern said at the beginning. We have to move beyond cost of inaction. We have to talk about the benefits. And I think Elke also mentioned that in the last panel, benefits of action, benefits of acting on green growth. So I think that's going to be a good homework for us to think about how we're going to shape our agenda going forward.